There is a plant growing in your lawn right now that most people spend money to destroy. And it may be one of the most useful water-moving herbs ever put in a garden. The dandelion. Not the root, the leaf. And that difference matters more than almost anyone realizes. For centuries, herbalists across Europe reached for a handful of dandelion leaves when someone's legs and ankles felt heavy, tight, and swollen by the end of the day. They had no laboratory, but they had a name for what the plant did. In France, they called it pissenlit, which translates, without much politeness, to wet the bed. In Old English gardens, it carried exactly the same nickname. That name was never an insult. It was a description of a real, observable effect. And modern analysis has given us a very good idea of why it happens, and why this particular plant behaves differently from nearly every other diuretic you can buy. So let's start with what a dandelion actually is. Its botanical name is Taraxacum officinale, and it belongs to the same family as sunflowers, chamomile, and marigold. The leaves grow in a flat rosette pressed close to the ground, deeply cut into jagged points. Those points are where the name comes from, Dandelion, lion's tooth. Each flower stalk is hollow, holds a single golden head, and bleeds a white milky sap when you snap it. Underneath, a thick taproot drives straight down, often 25 to 30 centimeters, sometimes far deeper, pulling minerals up from soil that shallow-rooted plants never reach. That deep root is the reason the leaf is so mineral-rich, and the minerals are where this story really begins. Dandelion leaf contains a group of bitter compounds called sesquiterpene lactones, along with flavonoids such as luteolin and apigenin, and a plant acid known as chicoraic acid. Those bitters are what make the leaf taste sharp, and they are closely tied to the effect on the kidneys. Here is the mechanism, simplified. Your kidneys filter your blood constantly, deciding moment by moment how much sodium and how much water to hold on to and how much to let go. When that balance tips toward holding, fluid seeps out of the bloodstream and settles in the tissue of the lowest part of the body: feet, ankles, calves. That is why the swelling shows up at the end of the day and softens overnight when you finally lie flat. And there are ordinary, everyday reasons that balance tips. A day spent standing on a hard floor. A day spent sitting in one position without moving your calves. A salty meal. Hot weather, which relaxes the blood vessels. A long flight. The natural hormonal rhythm of a monthly cycle. None of these are illnesses. They are just the body holding a little more water than it needs, in the place gravity sends it. That kind of heaviness is exactly the situation traditional herbalists were addressing when they reached for this plant. And it is very different from swelling that arrives without explanation and refuses to leave. Hold on to that distinction, because we will come back to it. Research suggests that dandelion leaf nudges that balance the other way, prompting the kidneys to release more sodium and more water. The pooled fluid moves back into circulation and out. That is the whole of it. No magic. Just a shift in how much the body is willing to keep. But here is the part that made herbalists treat this plant as something special. Most substances that move water out of the body take potassium with them. Potassium is the mineral your muscles and your heart depend on to fire correctly, and losing too much of it is the reason many people on water pills are told to eat bananas or take a supplement alongside. Dandelion leaf is roughly 4% potassium by dry weight. It is one of the richest leafy sources of potassium that grows in temperate soil. So while it is encouraging the body to release fluid, it is simultaneously delivering the exact mineral that gets lost in the process. Old herbal texts described it as a plant that pays its own debt. Now, one distinction you must not get wrong, because almost every article online blurs it. The leaf and the root are two different medicines from the same plant. The root is bitter in a heavier, earthier way, rich in a fiber called inulin, and it has traditionally been used for digestion, for the liver, and for stimulating bile. Useful, but that is a different job. For heavy, water-swollen legs, the tradition points clearly and consistently at the leaf. If you want to keep learning which plants can support your health, subscribe. There is a new one every week. The written record on this plant is old, and it is remarkably consistent. Arab physicians were describing dandelion as a medicinal herb more than 1,000 years ago. In Wales, the physicians of Mydfi listed it among their remedies in the 13th century, and when John Gerard published his Great English Herbal in 1597, dandelion was already a standard entry, not a curiosity. 50 years later, Nicholas Culpeper wrote about it plainly, noting that it was, in his words, vulgarly called pissabeds. He wasn't being crude. He was recording the single most reliable thing everyone in England knew about the plant. Then something happened that most people find genuinely surprising. When European settlers crossed the Atlantic to North America, they carried dandelion seed with them, on purpose. They packed it alongside their vegetables and their apple scions, because it was food in the hungry gap of early spring and medicine for the rest of the year. The plant that homeowners now poison by the gallon did not sneak onto this continent. It was invited, carefully, as a valued crop. And well into the last century, in country kitchens on both sides of the ocean, the first dandelion greens of the year were gathered deliberately as a spring tonic, after a winter of salted meat and stored root vegetables. Grandmothers were not foraging out of poverty. They were doing something they had been taught worked. So how is it actually used? The simplest preparation, and the traditional one, is a leaf infusion. Take 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried dandelion leaf, or a small handful of fresh, young leaves torn up, and pour 250 milliliters of just boiled water over them. Cover the cup because the aromatic compounds leave with the steam, and let it stand for 10 minutes. Then strain. The taste is frankly bitter and green. That bitterness is not a flaw to be hidden. It is the signal that the compounds you want are actually in the cup. A little mint or lemon balm in the blend softens it considerably without weakening it. Traditional use runs to 2 or 3 cups across the day. And there is one piece of timing advice that every practical herbalist gives: learn the hard way. Drink it in the morning and early afternoon, not in the evening. The old nickname exists for a reason. A tincture made from the leaf and alcohol is the other common form, taken in small measured doses of 1 to 2 milliliters, up to 3 times a day. It keeps for years, which matters if you want the plant available in February. And the easiest use of all requires no preparation at all. The youngest leaves, picked before the plant flowers, go straight into a salad. Sharp, a little like chicory. That is how most of Europe consumed it for most of its history. Now, the cautions, and please take these seriously. If you are allergic to ragweed, chamomile, marigold, or other members of that plant family, dandelion can trigger the same reaction. Start with a very small amount, or avoid it entirely. If you have gallstones or any obstruction of the bile duct, speak to a doctor before using this plant in any form. If you take pharmaceutical diuretics, blood pressure medication, or lithium, dandelion can interact with all three. The potassium content is exactly why this matters, particularly alongside the potassium-sparing type of water pill. This is a conversation for your doctor, not a decision to make alone. Never harvest from a lawn that has been treated with weed killer, from a roadside verge, or from anywhere dogs are walked. The plant concentrates what is in the soil, and that is a genuine risk. And the most important warning of all, swelling in both legs that does not settle overnight, swelling that comes on suddenly, or swelling accompanied by breathlessness or chest discomfort, needs medical attention. Persistent fluid retention can be a signal from the heart, the kidneys, the liver, or the veins. A herb is a supportive tool for ordinary end-of-day heaviness. It is not an answer to a body asking for help. If this garden has caught your curiosity, there is much more growing on this channel. Subscribe and let's tend it together. Which brings us to the part that sounds absurd until you understand it. Planting a dandelion on purpose. There are 2 very good reasons to do it. The first is that a plant you have grown yourself is a plant you know has never been sprayed. The second is that seed. Companies sell cultivated varieties bred over generations for larger, thicker, noticeably milder leaves. The French have grown these for market for well over a century. Look for the broad-leaved types rather than digging up whatever is in the lawn. The seed has one requirement that catches people out. It needs light to germinate, so scatter it on the surface of the soil and press it down firmly with your palm. Do not cover it. Seed buried under 1 centimeter of soil will simply sit there and rot. At around 20 degrees Celsius, expect germination in 10 to 14 days. Thin the seedlings to about 20 centimeters apart, so each plant can build a proper rosette. Soil is almost a non-issue. Dandelion will grow in poor ground, heavy clay, or the gravel at the edge of a path. But if you want tender leaves rather than survival leaves, give it deep, loose, reasonably rich soil so that taproot can drive down without fighting. Full sun produces the strongest, most bitter leaf. Partial shade produces a milder, softer one. And water genuinely matters here. A well-watered plant makes leaves that are tender and pleasant. A plant left dry in the heat makes leaves that are tough and punishingly bitter. Which leads to the single best trick in this entire video, borrowed straight from French market gardeners. Blanching. About 10 to 14 days before you intend to harvest, cover the plant completely with an upturned bucket or a flower pot with the drainage hole blocked. Cut off from light, the new growth comes up pale, crease, and crisp, and dramatically sweeter. It is the same principle used on endive and celery, and it turns dandelion from a survival green into something you will genuinely want to eat. Harvest the outer leaves and leave the central crown intact, and the plant simply grows more. Cut everything, and it will still come back, because that taproot holds enormous reserves. The critical timing rule is to gather leaves before the flower stalk rises. Once the plant flowers, bitterness climbs steeply. If you decide you also want the root, dig it in autumn of the second year, when it has stored the most. One practical note: deadhead the flowers before those seed heads open, unless you are prepared to share your entire garden with dandelions. A deep container, at least 30 centimeters, keeps the whole thing tidy and contained. The plant is a hardy perennial. It survives deep frost, comes back every spring without being asked, and will outlive most things you plant near it. So, let's bring this together. For heavy, swollen legs at the end of a long day, the tradition points at the dandelion leaf, not the root. Its bitter compounds encourage the kidneys to release held sodium and water, and unlike almost everything else that does the same job, the leaf replaces the potassium instead of stripping it. Drink it early in the day. Harvest the leaves young, or blanch them under a bucket first. Grow it in deep soil you know is clean, and if the swelling is persistent, unexplained, or one-sided, see a doctor before you see the garden. There is something worth sitting with in all of this. The most thoroughly hated plant in the modern lawn is the same one our grandparents deliberately carried across an ocean. Nothing about the plant changed, only what we decided to see when we looked at it. If you go outside tomorrow morning, it will be there, waiting to be pulled up or finally used.